This is my beginning watercolor class. I like to start with a series of exercises so that those of you that have not painted watercolor before or perhaps haven't painted it for a while can get acquainted with your brushes, your paint quality, and the paints themselves. And then also learn some of the basic techniques that you'll need to be able to enjoy watercolor. There are certain things that, once you've figured them out, it just makes it so much easier. So anyway, I will get going on this and show you what to do. So what I want to start with here today is what I call one color mixes. So the beginning thing with watercolor is that we need to we use the white of the paper for our whites. We make lighter colors by thinning our colors, and we make our dark colors by thick colors or making 2 or 3 color mixes. And so what I'm going to start with today to begin with, and I want for you to work with, is the one color mixes. And so there's a couple of things that we can do with just one color. One is what's called a flat wash. And so there's 2 ways I can do the flat wash. I can pre-wet the paper or I can do it on dry paper. So let's start by pre-wetting a space here. And actually I'm just thinking before I wet the paper, I want to mix a little bit of paint in my pan here. And let's step back one more step here, and that is, let's talk about primary colors, because this is the other thing that's important with our 1 and 2 color mixes. So our primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And when we mix yellow with blue, we get our secondary colors, which are shades of green. When we mix yellow with red, we get our oranges. And when we mix red with blue, we get our purples. And so those are your secondary colors, and they already have 2 primary colors in them. So when we get to doing those primary colors, I just moved my rag. I need my rag. There was a little drop of water there that I wanted to get off my paper. So we're going to just play to start with the primary colors. And the colors that I gave you, you actually have 2 different reds, you have 2 different blues, and 2 different yellows. But I'm going to just pick one of each, and we're going to work with those. So let's start with sort of my favorite here of the reds, which is a cool red in that it leans slightly toward the blue side. And this is a color that is called quinacridone rose. It had been dried a bit in my pan, so I'm needing to add a little bit of water. I had a wet brush, needing to add a little bit of water to it, and I want to make it about the consistency of whole milk. Whole milk. And now, if I'm always back and forth. There's various different ways we can start this. Let's just go ahead and, so I've got this mixed. I've got some of this ready to roll. And if I put this down on the page, dry, I'm going to put some down, and then I'm going to work it across an area. So I'm just taking my brush and sort of pulling it across the area. My brush is fairly well loaded with this paint. There's quite a bit of paint in my brush. So that's putting the paint down and making a flat wash, trying to be consistent with this color all the way across here. A flat wash. Now I can then do what's called a graded wash. This is all done on dry paper right now. So this is a graded wash. So I'm going to start with that really thick paint, and I'm going to rinse my brush in my water. And maybe I should move this so you can, I think you can see that. I'm working my brush back and forth in that water to clean my brush out. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to just tap it onto my rag to take part of that water out of my brush. If I don't, then I'll have so much water I can't control it. So this is one of the basic things to learn, is how to control the water in your brush. Now I'm going to dampen just the bottom of this, and I'm going to pull that downward. And just take my brush and sort of pull it downward a little bit. And then I'm going to rinse my brush again. I'm going to dry it again on that rag. about halfway. And then that clean, damp brush, I'm going to take the bottom of what was there and pull it down. Do it one more time. And then until it's almost clear. So that gets me a nice graded wash. Now, I can also work on wet paper. So let's just dampen that page just a little bit. And the thing, if you dampen the page, it gives you a little bit more working time. Sometimes, and depending on how big the area is, it might be the only way you can get a really smooth wash across it. So I'm just dampening it until there's a little tiny bit of sheen on there, but not a huge amount. So now when I go to put this thick paint on here, it's damp and it's going to thin it a little bit. So I can get a fairly clean wash. I can even make it run in here by moving the page and just letting it run. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, thin it a little bit, and then I'm going to take the bottom of this once again and I'm going to pull it down into that damp area. Now this is where a little bit of a lift of some sort to hold one edge of your page up is really helpful. So this is a little 1 by 1. If I set this in underneath of here, then gravity is going to help me, and this is going to run with gravity down the page. So I can just pull a little bit more of that into that area there. This has still got a sheen to it, and as long as it has a sheen to it, I can work it a little bit. If I lose the sheen, then my brush marks are going to really show a lot. Okay, so that is your first exercise. A flat wash, full strength, a flat wash on a wet area, and then do a graded wash underneath of it, and then do a graded wash with that color. Now go through and do this with all of your primary colors, the 2 different reds, the 2 different blues, the 2 different yellows, so you can see what that looks like. Now our next part of this is going to be to do 2 color mixes. So you played with that, spent some time with it, and now the 2 color mixes, we're still going to just use the primary colors. I'm only going to use red, blue, and yellow. I'm not using any of the secondary colors for this. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more red here, get myself a little bigger pile of red. And then I think I'll use blue for my second color. And which one of my blues should I use? Let me go ahead and use the cobalt blue. Once again, this was dry in the pan. So I'm going to set this right next to it. Now these 2 colors are fairly close to being the same value, as in that they are a similar darkness. And so when I go to mix them together, it doesn't really matter what order I do it in, but I'll show you in a little bit on doing a yellow, which is paler than either of these 2 colors. And if you start with the dark color and try to add yellow to it, it takes a lot to get those changes to show. But this won't. So let's start by making a patch of blue, that little flat wash, patch of blue. Rinse my brush really good, and then give myself 6 or 8 inches or even more. I could do it all the way down to the bottom of the page here. I'm going to put the red down. Now, my next thing is to take my dirty brush and take this right into the blue. This is now going to make a shade of purple. Still going to have a fair amount of blue to it because I didn't put a huge amount of red in there. Didn't have a lot in my pan anyway, and I maybe could have even put less red in it, would have made it a little bit more of a purpley shade. And now we're going to add a bit more red in here, and we should get a shift. I'm going to be sorry here because I should have actually I want to show you this where there's even a little bit more blue into the mixture. So let me just go back and add a bit more blue in here. And I'm going to just do it beside this one so you can see the difference between just a little bit of red in there and a bit more. Okay, now add just a little bit more red to this. It's so easy to get yourself a little too fast along the way. Add a bit more red into there. A bit more red into it. And now let's get some more red out of the pan. Just a little more red on my brush. A little more red into this. We're almost getting to the point where we could just almost go into that red area and see what it looks like with just a little blue. Now this is going to shift. Almost not. But look at this beautiful range of purples that we get as we shift from blue to red. And cobalt blue and quinacridone rose make beautiful, beautiful purples. Isn't that nice? All right, so that's 2 color mixes in the pan. Now let's see this same thing if we do them on a wet area. And I'm going to need to clean out one of these spots so that I've got nice, fresh, clean color. Get myself some nice, clean red to work with here. And since I've got a hole here, I can go ahead and use that to make some nice, clean blue. Now this time, I'm going to paint these 2 colors about 1 inch apart. And we don't want to wait too long because we still want these to be wet so that we can pull them into each other. Rinse my brush out, take it to that rag, dry it a little bit, pick up my other color. And so I'm going to leave about the width of one of those in between it. Now I'm going to take this color and pull it up into that color. So this is what's called mixing on the page. And so the 2 of them are just a little bit wet and they'll blend into each other. You'll see the original colors beside it. I'm going to do 1 more of these, but this time I'm going to wet the area. So I'm going to wet this area. This time, get a little more red on my paint. Let's see, we're red here at the bottom, so let's just do red at the bottom again. So this is in that wet area, and see how it sort of bleeds up into that water a little bit in that wet area. And now we are going to take the blue and set it here and let it run down into that red. I love what happens when these run together. You can also do this by splattering it on there, seeing how the colors shift. So this is wet into wet. This was wet into dry, and we're pulling it into the middle. So 2 color mixes. You're going to do this with every combination you can think of with your primary colors. So your reds, with your reds, your, oh, I was going to show you just a tiny bit. Well, remember what I said about the yellows that we need to, oh, do it, Margaret. Just go ahead and show them. Let's clean this out. One reason I'm slightly hesitating is that my water here has gotten to be a little bit purple, which means my yellows are possibly going to get sullied a little bit with that. and I don't have a fresh thing of water here. So let's see, since we've got red there, we'll do yellow and red. And so I need to mix up, and let me do the new, since I'm going to do yellow and red, I'm going to do new gamboge, which is a very warm yellow. It leans almost toward the orange side. I would call it, you know, egg yolk yellow, especially for eggs that have had their moms go out and eat bugs. You get a beautiful, beautiful yellow out of it. Now I can still use that same red, the quinacridone rose. It leans a little toward the cool side, but it still makes very nice oranges. So let's get a nice little bundle of that mixed up. Once again, I'm mixing these about the consistency of whole milk. If I have them too thick, they're not going to move very well on the page. So like straight out of the tube is too thick. We always thin it down just a little bit. Well, almost always. Once in a while you want it absolutely thick, thick where it doesn't move. But for most of your watercolor painting, you will be thinning the colors a little from the tube. That new gamboge was straight out of the tube. I had just put it down there, and I had to thin it enough to make it so it'll move fairly well. So now I was going to show you this whole thing of mixing just a little bit of red into the yellow. So if we do the yellow here, let's see, before I even do that mix in the pan, let's do one of these other ones too. Let's do a wet space. These are always fun to do because you've got the various things on the page here. The other thing I'm going to do before I finish is write what colors I used for these mixes so that I'm not getting myself confused later. It's easy to forget what you actually put down there. Which blue did I use? Which red did I use? And writing it down there is a really nice way to see that. And so now I've got that the yellow on the wet area. And then we're going to put the red down here at the bottom. It doesn't see, as you can see, it didn't really matter which order I took that in. And then I'm going to just pull this up enough so that the two of them are going to start blending together. And gravity is going to help pull that down in there. And I think, and here, let's just do a splatter. It's fun to play with this. This is a fun thing to play with. Now, we're going to do that dry. So remember how we did that? We did one here and then leaving ½ an inch to an inch between them. I then do the other color. And they both have a little bit of sheen on them. If I let this dry for too long, they won't mix nicely. So I want them so that they're, because water is what carries your paint back and forth in this. When you're working with acrylic and with oil painting, you have the oil or the acrylic medium to sort of pull the pigment around, but in watercolor it's being carried on water, and so that's one reason why we want to put it on a slant so that the water can help work for us. So I've done a nice little mix in between there, those two. Now we're going to get back to what we were doing here with the in-pan mix. I just wanted to do that before I got these dirty because otherwise I had to get them back out again. Now this is our quinacridone rose here at the bottom. Also notice that as this dries, look at the quinacridone rose changes color as it dries. And so what you put down initially may be a little bit different after it dries because of the nature of the paint. Now I'm going to take, I want to just have a little bit of paint on my brush, not very much, and so I'm pulling a little bit off the corner of this into my pan so that I only have a little of this red on my brush, because now I want to go into this yellow with that little bit of red, just a little bit of red, and you know, that all feels like enough there. I'm going to clean my brush out so that I don't have even more red. So I took that on one side so that I could just get a little bit in there because it's going to change that color really quickly. So now a little bit of red in here. makes this a little more toward orange. Now we're going to get a little more red, mix that in. And since my space is small here, I'll just make these a little smaller. A little more red into that mixture. And then I think we can just go into the mixture on the red side there for our last one. So aren't those pretty sort of peachy, sunsetty reds, reddy oranges? Yellow, orange, red, orange, and you get this beautiful shift, So that is 2 color mixes. Go ahead and spend some time, go through each of your colors, work on that. Now, 3 color mixes. 3 color mixes get us all of our muted colors and our secondary colors. Well, this was all our secondary colors. So our secondary colors were all the purples and the oranges and the greens, which I don't have on the page here, but all of our greens, and you can get all these different shifts and colors of greens. So now with the 3 color mixes, we can start altering and either muting or enriching the colors that we've already got. And so, you know, starting with this orange, let's just sort of mix that all together and make this a little bit more orange. So starting with this orange, beautiful orange. Let's see what happens when we put the opposite color on the color wheel with it. So this was orange, so right across from orange is blue. And let's just stick with that cobalt blue for now. And I'm not going to make a big long one because I don't have a huge amount of paint there, so let's just maybe here. So I rinsed that brush out to get a nice clean blue. And now I'm going to put just a drop of this blue in here and then rinse my brush because I don't want too much in there to start with. So now when I put a little bit of blue into there, that starts shifting it toward brown. And then when I put a little more blue in there, brown gray. And we can get some beautiful, beautiful grays this way. And a little more blue in there. And maybe I should have left myself room for a little bit more. And we'll just do a little skinny line here. So then this becomes a blue that's just muted down a little bit. So it gets it into more of a navy blue. And same with the orange, muted just a little bit with the blue, makes this sandy color, which is really quite nice. Now, one other thing that I didn't show you earlier, and I don't know if any of these dry yet. I'm actually working on this and continuing on when you guys have been working on things. That's about the only one that's really dry. That one's dry there. I wanted to show you something else, and that is layering. So with the 2 color mixes, once these dry, or you can make other patches of them that are a little bit larger. But let's just take a little bit of this new gamboge and paint it halfway across this. So this is the other way we mix with watercolor. Because it's transparent, the colors underneath will show through, and you can put another layer on top of an area and shift it. And so then that becomes an orange. And let's just take it down to here so that we can see the yellow beyond on both ends of that. So that's another way of shifting your colors. Okay, 3 color mixes. So go ahead and try this. Pick your primary color, look to see what's across it from the color wheel, and mix those together. So red with green, yellow with purple, blue with orange, and you will get a shift, a range of colors, and you may want to do a longer run than I did there. You get a range of colors from muting your original color to getting to neutral grays in the middle, grays and browns in the middle, depending on how much you have of each of those. So go ahead and play through on all of that, and we'll get back together for the last little bit. Also, on that same front, if these are very thick colors, it won't work with cobalt blue, but with, okay, show one more little thing. The thicker the paint is, the more it's going to be into a dark. So if I make this orange up and make it pretty thick, I want to make this really the consistency of cream, whipping cream, thick whipping cream. Not that whole milk, but thick whipping cream. And this is pretty dry, and I'm getting down to the end of it. I should have put more paint in my pan before we started. I want to get that nice and thick there. And then I'm going to bring a little bit of that yellow into there, so that'll be nice and thick. It's just pretty wet on here, and I just want to get some off the top of there without getting a lot into it. So let's go ahead and mix this together. Get that down in there. Ah, yes, it's a nice thick orange. And now, rather than using cobalt blue, which in its darkest shade is not that dark, I'm going to use ultramarine blue, and I'll just put a little ultramarine blue for you up there so you can see the difference. Rinse and clean my brush. Ultramarine blue. So this is ultramarine blue. Get my brush really cleaned out. I use these a lot, and sometimes my paint, when it's dry, you go on top of it and it'll get sullied a little bit, but not too bad. Here's my ultramarine blue. That little bit that started was more of a navy blue because it had just a little orange still in my brush, or maybe on the thing. So that's ultramarine blue. This is cobalt blue. So now let's see what's going to happen with this same setup here if it's thick. And so this is going to be thick. Rinse my brush. You notice that was relatively thin that I put on there. It wasn't overly thick. This color shade wasn't a lot darker than that shade. Now we're going to go with a thicker bunch. And I'm going to slowly add blue to that. And slowly add the ultramarine blue, not my I'm just got to be careful how much I put in there because I still want you to see the difference between this thick brown. And I need to dry, probably should have dried my brush even more. So a little thicker colors, but see that gorgeous brown. Dry that brush and dry it pretty well because I don't want to add a lot of extra water to this. Now we're going to add a bit more blue to this. We're going to get a mahogany shade, and then I'm going to add even more ultramarine blue to it, and I'm hoping that this will be pretty close to black. And I'm going to leave a little bit of room here because I want to show you what happens when I put even more blue in there. So that's pretty close to a neutral black. And even more blue in there is going to get us a navy blue. So thick paint, thinner paint, orange to blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, same red, same orange, that was New Gamboge and quinacridone rose. And okay, I'm on a roll. Let me go ahead and do the one last thing, and that is to show you another way to do this that's maybe a little bit faster when you need to, is rather than starting with orange, we're going to start a shade down, and this is burnt sienna. So burnt sienna is very close to this brown that we made with that first mixture. And now, let's see, let's get the burnt sienna in the pan right here. Get enough off of there that we got some to work with. So burnt sienna is a orangey brown. Now this was our ultramarine blue at the bottom here. Slightly dirty, it's not quite clean. It's okay. Add a little bit of this in here. So now starting with that burnt sienna, if I want to make my burnt sienna a little bit darker brown, just adding a little bit of ultramarine blue to it will do that. Adding a bit more ultramarine blue to it will get us closer to a neutral black. And so this is sort of a quicker way to get to black than mixing an orange and then working your way through this. And so that is leaning very slightly toward the brown side. Let me just make sure it's leaning toward the brown side and pick up a little more brown into here. Okay, a little more blue into this. A lot more blue into it. And once again, we get our navy blue. So if you're wanting to take the ultramarine blue and just tone it down and turn it into more of a navy blue, then just adding a touch of that color from the opposite color side of the color wheel will give you a nice navy blue. And I'm going to just take it into this because that was a little bit dirty, and I want to see that ultramarine blue clean by itself here. Let me just make sure I'm clean. Rinsing a little bit of paint off of my pile of color there. And now the ultramarine blue without any brown mixed into it. Okay. And so I won't do it in front of you here, but I will take a photograph and have it at the end of the video, my writing on what colors I had mixed in here. So your exercises start with one color mixes, flat washes, graded washes on water, graded washes not on water. Wet into wet with two color mixes. So this was a wet area, and then color was put into it and dropped across. This was two colors mixed, done onto dry and then pulled together in the middle. This was mixing in the pan, a little bit of red at a time into the yellow, just a tiny bit. Same here, mixing in the pan. We shifted from here, that goes to there because I went too fast on that, and then that comes back down into there. Okay. And dry, mix, pull together, on wet, mix together. And then three color mixes, lighter shades, darker shades, and then using brown with the blue and working that with it. And you can then do the same thing with, you think brown as being sort of the yellow of the three color mix, or the red, depending on which brown you're using. And then you get these nice little shades. So. Good. I will, yes, I'm going to take a photograph of this. I think we've got it. You've got enough to keep you busy for 2 hours. Do a little bit at a time, play with all your colors, and I could show you a couple of other little fun things. Sure, let's just do, I have a hard time stopping. Once I get painting, it's so nice to paint. So, another thing is that if you've got any sea sponges, these nice little hairy sponges, they are great to paint with. So they depending on how wet and how much paint we have in them. If I press down really hard, they really press on here. They have to be loaded fairly well with paint before they do much. But they make for, it's wonderful for doing trees, it's wonderful doing textures. It's a very nice, easy way to put some textury stuff onto your page. And then, of course, play with your brushes a little bit. See what kind of brush marks your brushes make. So if we hold our brush very high, and notice that I'm using my little pinky here, and I'm holding my brush with these 3 fingers, and I can move it back and forth. I can go sideways with it. I can use my wrist and do big long marks. So long mark with my wrist, holding my pinky and doing a mark. So I can start and pull up and lift and make a skinny mark at the end. I can go sideways. I can press down with my brush, make wide spaces. So play with that too. I can make little spots by just dropping the brush down. I can have a puddle of paint and then pull little pieces out at the top of it, which makes great for trees on the top of hillsides. So I'm starting down at the bottom, I'm pulling and then lifting, pulling and then lifting. And of course, this can look like COVID-19, little virus here. I'm just having fun right now. And take a little bit of this quinacridone rose and put some dots in him. There. Poison. Okay, I will end now, but that gives you some more things to play with.